Meet Michael Evans and Paul Terry. They were both convicted of a crime they had nothing to do with and exonerated after spending 27 years of their lives in prison. The case of Michael Evans and Paul Terry is one of many cases, hundreds, thousands of cases, that's tragic in this country, that happens continuously. It's something that never gets addressed properly. These things continue to happen. And so while there needs to be attention brought to the lives of these two victims, and I'm talking about Mr. Michael Evans and Mr. Paul Terry, the bigger issue, the bigger problem that we as a society, this is, what we have to focus on. Like it or not, it's an ugly subject. As far as, it's not very pleasant to have to think about prison and people going to prison and the charges that these people were facing because of the errors committed by people who are supposed to be professional enough to have a way of making sure they don't send any innocent people to prison. The bigger point that we need to focus on is how do we change the laws so that nobody else has to be picked up off of the street because there was a silly cop who decided to arrest someone because of a silly neighbor who decided this was the person I saw do something, and a silly prosecutor who decides I'm going to listen to this very flawed information. It's not very scientific, but I'm going to use this to convict a person that I'm not even 30% sure that they're guilty of this crime, but because we have them in custody, I'm going to go out of my way to convict this person and throw them in jail. When are we going to stop that? I don't know what has to be tweaked in our justice system that makes it illegal to pick someone up and charge them with the crime, because that's where it all starts. This whole BS about innocent until proven guilty is just a bunch of baloney. We all know that. It's a joke at this point in our society. You're guilty until you can come up with the money to prove yourself innocent, or something miraculous happens. But a lot of people, especially particularly in the less affluent areas down south, areas up north too, but it seems to be black people in the South, poor white people in the South, poor Hispanic people in the South seem to get the most injustice. This is where it seems most of these cases come from. So how do we, as a society, we can't just look the other way. We have to be empathetic to these people's plight, to their struggle. They get tossed into a system. They don't have a dime. They don't come from a very rich background. There's usually not a lot of education that goes along with a lot of these people, these victims of the justice system. So how do we, as people who never have had your life touched in a negative way by the justice system, how do we show that we care? It's something that has to be addressed. I don't know how we get things like this, to acknowledge the fact that people don't get a fair chance. You have a lot of these courts using junk science. They still use junk science to convict people. And it's just, it's a nightmare. Honestly, it really is a nightmare. It starts in the prosecutor's office. There's usually a lot of arrogance. There's a lot of, they just want to get the numbers up, They just want to blame someone. So the first person that fits the puzzle, kind of accurately, and it fills that role, they go out of their way to literally bury this person, even though this person's completely innocent. You know, it's crazy in such an advanced country like America that courts could still be using bite mark evidence as science today. It's actually junk science. You know, it's been proven that it's junk science, and they actually convict people on stuff even less evidence than that. You know, it's what we have to focus on, because the scumbags who do crimes are the ones you want to get off the street. That's, I believe, the goal of our society, of any society, is to get the pieces of garbage where they belong, behind bars. But you can't do that if everybody is okay with putting the wrong person in jail. You'll never get the scumbags. They'll always be out there. They'll continue to hurt people. They'll continue to do whatever it is they do because they're able to float under the radar. And we have the wrong person in custody. We've charged the wrong person. We've convicted the wrong person. And so the problem will persist, because there's not, you're not, you can't kill the problem if you're still letting the problem still fester out in society. I mean, I'm not a lawyer. I'm not very versed in the legal system as far as like laws on the books and how you get them changed, right? But I would imagine it starts with, we need to focus on this charging. When a person's charged and then ultimately indicted and then usually convicted, that whole process is flawed. They've given up their entire life behind a prosecutor's office that they're just gung-ho on pointing the finger at this individual and saying, you fit the bill of the person we want to lock up and charge and convict, right? But usually they're not. I mean, not to say they don't get it right sometimes, There's habitual criminals who they get and they throw away. Great, wonderful. That's what we want. I don't want my family walking around with a street full of criminals, but that's what we're doing as a society. If we're always allowing the wrong person to get convicted, then the right person who should have been convicted is still free out here doing horrible things. So it really doesn't do us any good to not take some action that's going to basically help to eliminate these errors that we have, in our justice system. It's it just seems like common sense to me, But like I said, it's an ugly subject. Nobody wants to address these types of things because they're not pleasant. They're not. There's just things that, we'd rather sweep under the rug, even though there's an innocent person's life involved. As long as it's not affecting us, we're willing to sweep it under the rug. That's the sad truth of our society. A lot of people in our society. It has to change. It has to change. And it has to change by not allowing, people that have a badge, that call themselves prosecutors or state's attorneys, forensic scientists, that supposedly know what they're doing, but they're throwing people in jail behind junk science. I think about Mr. Michael Evans and Mr. Paul Terry. Both of these men, not only did they lose most of their life, they're both old men at this point. They spent 27 years in prison. Not only did they lose a large portion of their life, a chunk, a lot of people have never done anything in their life for 27 years. These men did hard time for 27 years for something they didn't do. These are men who never in their lives, I'm sure, could ever imagine themselves hurting someone the way they were charged as being those people who were charged and did something horrible. But they have to live for the rest of their life knowing that, even though they were exonerated, still, for 27 years, they had a label that is the worst label you could do to someone. I mean, it's like mentally, on a mental level, it has to be the worst thing that could ever happen to someone. It's not just the doing the time. That's just the physical part, Everybody can do that if needed in life. It's unpleasant. Nobody wants to, but yeah, anybody can do some time on a physical level. But the mental part of the whole thing has to be something that you or I and people who haven't experienced those things to that extent, couldn't imagine having to deal with and carry with that weight, that burden of something that should not in any way be attributed to you, but it has been for 27 years. There's too many men and women who are victims to this very erroneous system that we have here in America. So Michael Evans and Paul Terry, at the end of the day, they spent 27 years in prison, mainly behind the perjured testimony of a woman who, I'm not sure what her motives are. I can only imagine what her motives are. I'm not saying anything about her being a racist, but because there's this image of black men in this country, I would imagine, and how she was raised, and just this mental conditioning that goes along with living in America as a white lady, it was easy for her to make the stretch that those two black men had to be the people who hurt this girl, right? Even though she didn't visually see anybody with anything. She didn't see anything happen. She made up a story. She changed the time that she said she saw these people, and the DA used that, and they convicted these two young black men. They were both 17 at the time of this incident, and their lives were thrown away, man. And it's tragic, man. It really is tragic. It is the most horrible thing. I don't wish that on my worst enemy. Seriously, I don't wish that on my worst enemy. It's the worst thing that could possibly happen to someone. And we just sit around and we eat our hamburgers and we fucking, play with our iPhones, and we go back and forth on social media while there's people who are literally innocent of crimes. It continuously happens. It always happens. It doesn't stop in this country. One of the things that strikes me as very odd about the Michael Evans and Paul Terry case is the fact that the woman who gave the testimony from the jump with this case, her statements didn't add up. The timeline didn't add up. She was at work when she said she saw something. Her time card at her job showed that she was actually at work when she said that she saw this thing happen. All these little bitty facts and little pieces of knowledge that the DA had back in 1976 when all this initiated, they didn't use any of that. They didn't bring that to trial. They didn't look and investigate further into these things, which probably would have saved Mr. Michael Evans and Mr. Paul Terry from having to spend 27 years in prison. So it's just a tragic miscarriage of justice. We cannot continue to expect to live in a happy, peaceful society when you have people that you throw in jail for no good reason. Even if they do get a very minuscule reward from the state after having to give their lives up for 27 years. They didn't willingly do that. It doesn't matter. It's garbage at that point. They've lost probably things that mean a lot more to them than that little petty money. Let's start putting the blame. Let's start putting the focus on mistakes. I mean, it's the justice system, If doctors in hospitals made as many mistakes as DAs make, they'd have all kinds of lawsuits and criminal charges brought against them for making those mistakes. Why are we still allowing prosecutors and states' attorneys' offices to make just the mistakes that cost people their lives? Literally, it's not like a mistake that has no consequences. It's people's lives are being snuffed away, taken away from them because of the incompetence of prosecutors, and we should put a stop to that.